Welcome back to my series of videos about EdgeTX, the operating system that is probably running on your radio right now. In the previous video, we showed how you could map a physical control to a logical channel using the mixes screen on your radio. But simply passing those physical controls directly through the mixes screen to the receiver isn't always what we want to do. And today we're going to dive into some of the ways that you can manipulate that information before it gets to the receiver. And before we get into that content, you should know that this video is part of a series where I go through a whole bunch of information about EdgeTX, the operating system that runs on our radios, to try and teach people more about it. A lot of people know the basics of using it, just enough to get by on a day-to-day basis, but they don't know, like, when you go through all these menus, like, what do they do? And how do you get the radio to do what you really want it to do? That's what this video series is about. And there's a whole playlist. I want to invite you, after you finish this video, to check out that playlist. It's got a whole bunch of information about EdgeTX and will make you a whole lot smarter about how to use your radio. That's linked in the video description below when you get to the end of this one. It really doesn't seem like the right way to teach this is just to dive into the menu options and explain what they are. I don't think they're going to make sense if I do it that way. So instead, we're going to start with a premise, like a useful thing you might want to do, and we're going to use that as an excuse to explain the options. And the useful thing we're going to do is what's called dual rates. So here we are in the flight controller's rate profile settings screen, and we can see that as I deflect the stick, this little red marker here shows the stick position that the flight controller is seeing. And I can deflect that stick all the way to 670 degrees per second of rotation, or less, depending on how far I deflect the stick. And the idea that some people come up with is, well, sometimes maybe I want high rates for fast flips and rolls, and sometimes I might want low rates for very slow, precise movements. Now, Betaflight does have a way that you can set up different rates. We have rate profiles here. And most of the time you would set this up in the flight controller. But let's imagine that we're doing this with an aircraft where we don't have the ability to do it in the flight controller, or for some other reason it's not convenient for us to do it in the flight controller. How would we do dual rates, fast rates and slow rates, if we wanted to do it here in the radio? And the first thing I want to show you is that here in the mixes screen, I can have multiple mixer lines per channel. So right now I have the aileron on channel 1, elevator, throttle, and rudder on channels 2, 3, and 4. But I can add more mixer lines here. And I do that by long pressing the jog wheel and doing insert before or insert after, and that will add a new mixer line. And let me just make this simple. I'm going to choose the source for this mixer line, and I'm going to click once to make it flash, and I'm going to turn this knob here, and that knob is going to be added there. And if I go back to the receiver tab here in Betaflight, you can see that that knob is in fact being added, literally added. If I center the knob, then the aileron channel works as expected. But if I tweak that knob just a little bit, do you see that it is now adjusting the value of the aileron channel? And in fact, if I turn the knob all the way to one side, the channel goes to full. And if I turn it all the way the other way, the channel goes to the minimum value. So we're literally adding. We're literally adding the value of these two controls together. Now, when would you want to do that? I don't know. That's not the example we're working towards. I just want you to understand the concept. And in fact, if we look right here, we can see plus equals, indicating that this mixer line is being added to the mixer line before it. There are various operators that can be applied between the mixer lines to cause them to interact in various ways. But we don't want to add them. What we want to do is this. I'm going to delete that mixer line. I'm going to go and I'm going to add a second aileron mixer line. So I'm going to long press and do copy, and then scroll down once and hit enter here. And now we have two aileron lines being added together, which again is not what we want, but what would the effect of that be? It's basically going to double the output of the aileron inputs. So if I begin to deflect the aileron stick, when the aileron stick reaches 50% travel, the channel will actually be at 100%. And then the remaining 50% of travel will have no effect whatsoever. So we've essentially doubled the output. What I actually want to do is this. I'm going to take that second mixer line and I'm going to long press and edit. And I'm going to go down to the multiplex option. And the multiplex option is what controls how the mixer lines on a single channel interact with each other. The default value is add, which means they're added together. But I can change that, and I'm going to change that to replace. And what that means is that when you have multiple lines one after the other, the last one will replace the ones that came before it and will just completely replace its value. So if I go and change this source from aileron to the potentiometer again, you can see that now that potentiometer knob is completely replacing the aileron stick. If I move the aileron stick, it has no effect whatsoever on the roll channel. It's not moving. Only moving that knob is affecting the aileron channel, which is kind of silly and pointless, right? I've just gotten rid of the one before it. So what we need to do if we're going to do this is we need the ability to tell the controller which one of these mixer lines we want to be active at a given time and to switch between them. And here's how we do that. So I've gone back and I've edited that second line. So now it is 2 aileron lines. The potentiometer knob is gone. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the first line, long press and edit, and I'm going to scroll down to the switch parameter. And the switch parameter, a lot of people mistakenly use the switch parameter when they're setting up a mix that is based on a switch. Like they want to set up their arm switch, so they use the switch parameter. That is not how the switch parameter is intended to be used. As you learned in the previous video, if you want to set up a mixer line based on a switch, you put the switch as the source. That's how it works. What the switch parameter does is it causes the mixer line to become active or inactive based on a switch position. So for example, I'm going to highlight the switch parameter and I'm going to flick this switch here into the middle position. And it will pick up switch SB in the middle position as the thing that will make this mixer line come to life. It can be down, or it can be up, or it can be the middle position. I'll put that in the up position. SB up is going to be what causes this mixer line to become active. And I'll click the jog wheel, and we can see that SB up is bold, and then now it is not bold, indicating that it is not active at this time. And I'll back out one by pressing the return key, and once again. And then we can also see here that we've got SB up here indicating on the main screen that this mixer line will only become active when switch SB is up. We're going to scroll down to the second aileron line, long press and edit, and go to the switch parameter. And for this one, we're going to put SB in the middle position. And now what I want you to see is that by moving switch SB up, middle, down, up, middle, down, we can cause these mixer lines to become active and inactive. When switch SB is up, the first mixer line becomes active. When it's in the middle position, the second mixer line becomes active. And when it's down, none of them are active, which may or may not be what we want, but we'll get to that in a second. So now I've got the ability to select between these two mixer lines, and we're almost to the dual rates that we wanted. But how do we actually make the second line have slower rates? Here, that brings us to the wait parameter. So I'm going to highlight that second mixer line and edit, and I'm going to go to wait, and I'm going to adjust wait. And I want you to see what happens. I'm going to hold the roll stick all the way to the left so that the channel is all the way at its minimum value. And then I'm going to begin reducing the weight. And I want you to see that as I reduce the weight, the end point of the channel moves inwards. So if I reduce that weight to 50%, now the weight is at 50. Now the channel is only halfway deflected between the midpoint and the end point. It'll go from midpoint of 1500 to about 1250, about halfway. And likewise, if I deflect the stick to the right, it'll go up to about 1750, about halfway between the midpoint and the endpoint, or 3/4 of the way to the travel. So when you adjust the weight, I want you to think about pulling the endpoints in towards the middle or pushing the endpoints out away from the middle. As you might expect, if I set the weight all the way at 0, take that weight all the way down to 0, then the channel will simply not move at all. It'll just be locked out. And I don't know why you would want to do that, but you could do that if you wanted to. Now nothing's happening. So let's set that weight to 75%. Let's set it to 75%. And what that's going to do is that when this mixer line is active, we will not be able to go to full deflection and we will not get our full rates. And if we go to the PID tuning tab and the rate profile settings, we'll see that you see that we are not going to full deflection. We're only going to 400 degrees per second. But if I flip the switch into the up position, now we're going to full deflection and we're going 670 degrees per second. So by flipping that switch and by having different weights on each of these mixer lines, we can flip that switch to choose which rate that we want, the dual rates. Now, in order to really have dual rates, we would need to also do this for the yaw and the pitch axis, which would be exactly the same process, and I'm not going to make you sit through me doing it. But I want you to see the basic process for setting up multiple mixer lines on a single channel and then using a switch to switch between them. That is how you set that up, and that's something that does come up at various times. Now, there is a little bit of a problem here, and that is that if I set that switch all the way down, none of the mixer lines are active, and the roll channel is completely locked out. And I probably wouldn't like that. So here's how I could work around that. Well, one way I could do that is I could just copy one of these mixer lines. Copy, put it here, and then edit it and go down to switch and make that be the choice for switch down. Okay, so if you've got a 3-position switch, probably the safest thing to do is to define a mixer line for all 3 of the positions so you have explicitly defined the behavior that you want for each of those positions. So in this case, we would have 75% rates for down and mid, and then 100% rates for up. I could make that however I felt like I wanted it. The other thing I could do, and this is a little more risky because it leaves open the potential for things to not go how you might intend them, is I could have 2 mixer lines. And the first one, I'm going to edit it, the first one does not have a switch parameter. Let me just get rid of that, okay? The switch parameter is zeroed out. And then the way it's going to work is that as long as switch SB is not in the middle position, this second mixer line is disabled. And therefore, the first mixer line is the only one that is actually working, and we're at 100%. As soon as I put switch SB in the middle position, now that second mixer line comes to life and replaces the first one. And if I put switch SB in the down position, once again, that second mixer line disables itself, and the first one is the only one that is currently active. So you could have the second one selectively override the first one based on the switch position would be another way to do it. Now, we've been doing this demonstration in the black and white screen radio, and if you have a touch screen radio, I want to show you what that's going to look like, and I want to do the next part of the tutorial in the color touchscreen, and the people with the black and white screens will have to sort of extrapolate along. So here on the radio, I am going to, well, I could press the model setup button and then go to the mixer screen if I want to, or I could just tap on the screen and hit model settings and tap right there. Either one is fine. I could do those same things here, like I could highlight channel 1, long press, and copy, right, and long press, and paste after. So instead of add before or add after, yeah, it's a little bit different, but here we've copied it. We got the second one, and then I can highlight that and edit it. And I can go in and you can see here we've got the weight parameter. And where is the multiplex parameter? That is going to be here in the gear menu. So they've put it into a submenu, but that's okay. It's right here, multiplex add, multiplex replace, and it's exactly like you saw there. There's a whole bunch of other parameters as well. We haven't gotten to them yet. Don't worry. We can't do it all at once, but that's how you would set that up. I'm going to delete that because most people would say that if you wanted to set up dual rates, you shouldn't set it up in the mixer screen. You should set it up in the input screen. So let's introduce the idea of the input screen, which is the one before the mixer screen. And at first glance, the input screen looks a lot like the mixer screen. Like we've got aileron, elevator, throttle, and rudder. But here's what you need to know. The mixer screen's main job, it's not its only job, but its main job is to assign an output to a channel. The mixer screen is where channel 1 gets the output from the aileron, or channel 2 gets the output from the rudder. It is the linking between the channels and whatever is coming into those channels. The input screen is a way that we can manipulate or massage those values before they get to the mixer. So I want you to think about, we've got the physical control, which is a switch or a knob or a gimbal, joystick, whatever. That physical control is feeding its value into the input screen. And the input screen is potentially shaping or manipulating that value before it's fed into the mixer screen, and then the mixer screen outputs it onto a channel. You follow me there? There's actually more to that flowchart, but for now, that's all we need to talk about. Now, the advantage of the inputs screen is, like, let's imagine that I had an input that I wanted to put on more than one channel. Let's say I don't know why, go with me. Let's say I want the throttle channel to be output to multiple ESCs. I've got multiple ESCs on my ground vehicle, and I want to drive all those motors, and they're all on different channels. So I need the throttle to go out on channels 4, 5, 6, and 7. Well, I would go into the mixer screen, and I would put the throttle on channels 4, 5, 6, and 7. No problem. But what if I also want to like shape the throttle output like I did with the dual rates? Do you see that I would then need to go into the mixer and I would need to have that same logic on channels 4, 5, 6, and 7. I lost count of how many motors I have. I would get complicated. I would need to have all that logic, the manipulating and shaping the throttle channel. I would need to have it 4 times, one for each of the motors and once for each of the channels. What the input screen lets you do is shape that input in one place, and then feed that shaped input into the mixer screen, and then map that out on whatever channels you want to map it out. And it's a little bit confusing because some of the things that the input screen can do can also be done in the mixer screen. They have a lot of overlap. And it's just a question of sort of logically in your brain, where does it make the most sense to do this thing? But the main reason that the input screen is essential is if you are outputting the same output on multiple channels, you want all your shaping to be done on the input so that you don't have to do it multiple times on the mixes screen. Okay, so what kind of shaping am I talking about? Well, here we've got an input. It's the aileron input. And if I long press that aileron input and edit it, you can see here is the input screen. And you see that the input has a source, and that source is the aileron stick. So what we've actually done is we've taken the aileron stick, the physical control, we fed it into the input, and we can see here the actual little stick icon next to where it says aileron. And then if we go to the mixes, and I've deleted all the old mixes so we can get back to the defaults, if we add a new mix on channel 1, you can see that the default is not the physical stick, but the input. So this little icon to the left of ail here, that means it is the aileron input, not the aileron stick. Let me put them side by side so you can see them. So here at the top is the aileron input, and here at the bottom is the aileron physical stick, which is bypassing the input screen. Most of the time you'll see the sticks being used with the input. That's just the way it's done by default, although it doesn't have to be done that way. Back to the input screen. We're going to edit that aileron input. What can we do here? Well, you can see here that one of the things we can do is we can manipulate the weight. And the weight manipulation here is exactly like the weight of the mixes that I showed you before. We could set that weight to 75%. Let's do that. Let's scroll that down to 75% there. And now the aileron input, if we look in Betaflight, it's going to work. It should work exactly like before. What's going on here? Oh, it's because the wrong goddamn radio is turned on. So if I deflect the aileron stick, then I'm going to get 75% stick travel instead of 100%, just like I previously set up with the mixers. And I can go here in the inputs and I can long press and copy that line and long press and paste that line. And then I can have a second line, which I give the weight of 100%. You'll notice sometimes I like to use the jog wheel instead of the touch screen. I just find it sometimes a little bit more, I don't know. I've just been doing it for a long time. Maybe it's just habit, but I find the jog wheel a little bit easier sometimes. Now, one difference between the mixer and the input screen is that the input screen does not add together the multiple lines. If you have multiple lines on the input screen, like I do here, only one of those lines is ever going to pass through to the mixer screen. And it's basically the first one, and then it works its way down the list if the first one for some reason is not valid. Why would the first one not be valid? Well, if I go in and edit, I can see that there is a switch parameter here, just like there was in the mixer. So if I take that switch parameter and I make this line be active when switch SC is in the up position, and I'll edit and make this line be active when switch SC is in the middle position, then I've got the ability to switch between those two mixer lines with a switch. However, there is no adding logic like there was in the mixer, just to reiterate. It is always replace logic, and it's always the first line from the top that is allowed to be active that will get selected. I hope you're learning a lot in this video series. If you are, would you please consider joining my Patreon? Patreon is a website where you subscribe to me. The minimum entry fee is $2 a month, and you get some rewards like getting access to my Discord server, but mostly what you get is a good feeling that you're giving something back. I make this content for free. I put it out there for free. I don't charge you anything. Don't put it behind a paywall. And I just hope that eventually you'll come to a point where you'll go, okay, I feel like giving something back. If today's that day, there's a link in the video video description below to my Patreon. I'd love to have you as a supporter at whatever level you think is fair for the amount of value you get out of my content. If that's $2 a month, great. If it's $10 a month, even better. You subscribe at whatever level you feel like, and you can raise or lower or cancel whenever you feel like that's the right thing for you to do. Links in the video description below. Thank you so much. So what did we learn in this video? We saw that we can have multiple mixer lines, and those mixer lines can add together or they can replace each other based on the multiplex parameter. And we saw that we can change the weight of the mixer line to adjust the endpoints of the channel, basically when we deflect the stick or switch, how far in and out those channels go. And we use that to make a dual rate situation. I do want to reiterate that in real life, I would recommend doing dual rates in the flight controller, not in the RC controller, but that is obviously a decision for you to make based on your particular circumstances. We also saw that the input screen feeds into the mixes screen, and that the input screen can be used to do some of the same thing that the mixes screen can do, but there are going to be times when it'll be sort of more convenient in terms of the logical flow of the radio to put the logic in the input screen instead of in the mixes screen. You just do all your manipulation in the inputs and then you map it to a channel in mixes instead of getting all muddled up by doing all that stuff in one place. There's a lot more here for us to learn and a lot more things we can do. And of course, we're going to get into all of that in future videos in this series. Speaking of which, the playlist with all the videos of this series, there's a card on screen right now if you can see it, or a link in the video description below, and I will see you in the next one.